Welcome to Military Analytics. The relationship between two people is not always the same. Sometimes intimacy increases, and sometimes there are problems in the relationship. Sometimes there is cooperation, and sometimes there is fighting. States are just like people. Changes can also occur in the relationship between two states. Recently, relations between Belarus and Russia have been undergoing frequent changes. According to statements made by the Ukrainian government, there is a tension between Belarus and Russia. This tension could change the course of the war. As a daily news team, we conducted a comprehensive research on this tension between Belarus and Russia. There seems to be a serious change in the cooperation between the two countries. We have been intensively researching for a long time to uncover the facts. It is important to support independent journalism, to keep this kind of reporting going to support us. You can use the Super Thanks button below the video. Let's get started. As you know, the Russian army has been stationed in Belarus for a long time. The Russian troops were planning to create a safe zone using military bases in Belarus. Recently, the number of Russian troops in Belarus has increased significantly. This is because the Ukrainian army has managed to establish a strong superiority over Russia in the war zone. The Ukrainian army forced the Russian army to retreat in many areas. Many Russian bases were destroyed. The Russian army then decided to move many of its military depots to Belarus. Since the Ukrainian army did not attack the military bases in Belarus, a safe space was created for the Russian army. Russia wants Belarus to join this war, but Ukraine is being very careful about this. The Ukrainian government strongly emphasizes that it will not attack any country. Zelensky says that the goal of the Ukrainian army is to protect the integrity of the country. This attitude of Ukraine is disrupting Russia's plans. As you know, the geographical position of Belarus is critical for this war. Belarus is in the north of Ukraine and very close to Kiev. That's why Russia wants Belarus to be involved in this war. However, Belarus is very hesitant about this. This is badly affecting relations between Russia and Belarus. It is known that the talks between Belarus and leader Lukashenko and Putin have been very tough. There was strong cooperation between Lukashenko and Putin. However, disagreements between the two leaders increased during the war. Putin started to put pressure on Lukashenko for Belarus to join the war. Lukashenko resisted this pressure, but then Putin had to back down because the Russian army needed to use military bases in Belarus. Putin had to establish good relations with Lukashenko. The Russian army started to use military bases in Belarus as training camps. The soldiers to be sent to the war zone were first stationed in Belarus. These soldiers were in these bases for about a month before training. Then Russian soldiers were transported to the war zones by armored vehicles. Ukrainian Armored Border Security spokesman Andrei Monchenko said that there are about 11,000 Russian soldiers in Belarus. However, according to Monchenko, this number has decreased very quickly in the last month. At the moment, the number of Russian troops in military bases in Belarus has dropped to less than 2,800. The Russian army is suffering a heavy defeat in this war. That is why there is now a very serious decline in the number of troops. The Russian army is understaffed on many fronts. About 200,000 soldiers have died in the Russian army. The number of wooden soldiers is not yet known. It is also known that thousands of Russian soldiers fled the war zone and surrendered to the Ukrainian army. In total, it is estimated that about 500,000 Russian soldiers are enabled to fight. This number reveals a major change in the structure of the Russian army. Russian President Vladimir Putin can do nothing to solve this problem. In the army, Putin declared mobilization and conscripted 300,000 Russian youth into the army. But the Russian people reacted very strongly against Putin's decision. Putin does not dare to declare mobilization again because he is afraid that the Russian people will revolt. But Putin had a plan B. Putin wanted to involve the Belarusian army in the war in case the Russian army was insufficient in this war. But as the war dragged on, this became impossible. The Belarusian government also realized that Russia could not win this war. Lukashenko does not want the party to be a losing war, and the Belarusian people don't want to go to war either. As you know, the elections in Belarus in 2020 ended in a very chaotic manner. Lukashenko, the repressive leader of Belarus, is alleged to have manipulated the elections. Lukashenko, who has ruled Belarus since 1994 and now said he won these elections with 80% of the vote. But the Belarusian people did not believe it. The police intervened harshly in the protests in the streets and more than 3,000 people were arrested. The protests continued for a long time, but then all the protesters had to return home due to COVID-19 pandemic. But the Belarusian people are still very angry. There are millions of people who think that Lukashenko should resign immediately. That's why Lukashenko is very worried. If he decides to join this war, it is thought that the people will start a huge revolt. Lukashenko is afraid of his own people. The biggest fear of all repressive leaders is the people. The situation in Belarus is one of the most important variables in this war. Lukashenko's decisions are crucial for the future of Ukraine and Russia. But Ukraine is very clear about this. Ukrainian soldiers say that they will win this war no matter what. Speaking to the Ukrainian press, the soldiers say that they will fight bravely to ensure the freedom of their country. The Ukrainian people have always supported their soldiers. This is a great sense of solidarity in the country. This solidarity is the biggest source of Ukraine's success in the war. Solidarity has increased in Ukraine in recent days. Ukrainian government is saying that spring will come very soon. Ukrainian government is preparing for a massive offensive to liberate the whole country. The Ukrainian army, which is preparing for a major operation, now wants to end this war. The Ukrainian government has been preparing for this operation for a long time. The aim is to inflict a heavy defeat on the Russian army with an operation in the spring. As a result of this operation, it is planned that the Russian army will retreat and Ukraine will win this war. Ukrainian commanders are preparing very strong plans for this operation. This operation could be one of the biggest offensives in the world. The Ukrainian army will use thousands of drones, tanks, missile systems, and rockets for this operation. It is known that all soldiers in the army will participate in this operation. The Russian army does not have enough preparation for this operation. Russian soldiers are already in great fear. The Donbas region completely turned into a fighting ring this week. Ukraine's eastern front lines have started to move a lot. Mobility in the war began to shift towards Luhansk, especially from the Donetsk region. Now let's dive into the striking moments of the war from Donetsk, Luhansk without wasting time. Our first stop is the city of Bakhmut, the most important front line of the Donetsk front line. The city witnessed the fiercest and most critical battles. The small but important city of Bakhmut was subjected to heavy attacks by the Russian forces. Ukrainian forces are trying to repel all attacks of Russian forces in order to keep the city standing. Why is Russia fighting so hard for Bakhmut? How do Ukrainian forces succeed in Bakhmut as divine justice? We strive to bring you the most striking news, collective and accurate information from the front by working hard day and night with our expert staff as quickly as possible. You can support us by subscribing to our channel before moving on to what happened in Bakhmut. Let's all turn our attention to the general situation of the front lines in the eastern region where many important clashes took place. The Russian forces continue to carry out offensive operations in the Kupiansk-Lyman, Bakhmut, and Avdiivka directions, which are their main efforts. Russian forces did not succeed in an attempt to attack nearby Lohorivka in the Luhansk region. The Russians fired dozens of artillery shells at civilian settlements near the front line in the Kharkiv region. In addition, Russian forces did not succeed in their attacks on civilian settlements on the outskirts of Avdiivka in recent days. Russian forces have had a remarkable failure. This failure helps Ukrainian forces get what they want. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine provides information about the front line with the statements it frequently shares on the subject. Now, let's take a closer look at the painful situation of the Russian forces by examining the recent critical situations and violent clashes in Bakhmut. Working hard day and night with our expert staff, we strive to deliver hot information and special analysis from the front to you as quickly as possible. You can support us with the super thanks button below. The Ukrainian Air Force carried out numerous attacks in the city of Bakhmut, which was seen as the center of the war. As always, the target of the Ukrainian forces were Russian military assets. Recently, the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 15 attacks on Russian troops in just one day. While the Russian troops are aiming to besiege the city of Bakhmut, the attacks of the Ukrainian troops nullify this effort. In addition, a Russian arsenal was blown up in these attacks. When we cross from Donetsk, Luhansk, Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian ammunition depot in Kadivka, 24 miles behind the front line in the occupied territory. Immediately after their critical attack, the city of Kadiyevka is a Russian-occupied settlement in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine, where Putin's forces are believed to be storing military stocks for use at the front. For this reason, the Ukrainians cut off the supply routes of the Russians between Luhansk. The Russians, who are already having problems with ammunition, will now have difficulties in making military supplies in Luhansk, especially to the Kremenna and Stichova front lines with the destruction of this arsenal. On the other hand, the head of the Luhansk Oblast Military Administration, Sir Hihede, published images of the explosion and confirmed the attack. The shells fired by the Ukrainian forces directly hit the Russian long-haul trucks. Russian forces made great efforts to put out the fires. Huge smoke rose from the place where the explosions took place. Despite the massive smoke, Russian media dubbed the eruptions Bavna, a term they use to downplay Bavna means cotton in English. The phrase is now used by Ukrainians to make fun of the explosions in Ukraine that Russia claims is the territory they have annexed. But the scale of the attack was much larger. Contrary to what was portrayed in the Russian media, it is not known how much longer Moscow could hide that Russian arsenals are melting away on the territory of Ukraine. But the situation seems very serious for the Russian army at the moment. On the other hand, the city of Kadivka is located in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine, one of the 4 regions illegally annexed by Putin last September. To remind you, Russian forces use the facilities in the occupied regions as military bases and arsenals. If the Ukrainian forces detect that the facilities are being used by Russian forces, they carry out attacks without wasting time. According to the first information received, this arsenal where the Ukrainian forces attacked was previously used as a factory. Russian forces were trying to hide ammunition trucks at this factory from UAVs of Ukrainian forces. Sirai Hayday stated that Bavona is in the factory where the Russian forces are trying to hide their ammunition trucks. Kadivka is located about 24 miles from Bakhmut and about 35 miles from Kremenna. Due to its proximity to 2 different front lines, Kadivka is a logistical hub for Russian forces, assuming a long period of fierce fighting on both fronts. Ukrainian forces seriously damaged the offensive capabilities of Russian troops in the direction of Bakhmut and Kremenna. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky made a speech to the citizens of Ukraine containing information about the situation at the front. Although Zelensky described the current situation of the war as very difficult, he stated that Russian forces have not yet surrounded the city. Hero Chernihiv, a Ukrainian deputy and head of the Ukrainian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, explained that although Bakhmut is not of strategic importance for Kiev, they will still try to keep it as long as possible. Chernihiv noted that the Russians were gradually crushing their most combat-ready units, and regardless of the future fate of Bakhmut, they managed to gain valuable time. At the same time, he noted from Chernov's words that the Ukrainian forces are gathering strength for future counterattacks. Chernihiv stated that in recent months the Russians had to spend enormous resources and reserves to take Bakhmut, and he pointed out that the Ukrainian forces were planning this. So why is Russia risking such great losses to seize Bakhmut? If Moscow aims to seize Donetsk and Luhansk by the spring, then taking Bakhmut could be an important milestone in the eastern move. Michael Kaufman, director of Russian studies at the US-based Center for Naval Analysis, noted that the route to Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, both of which have been hit by recent Russian missile attacks, passes through Bakhmut. Ukrainian and Russian forces have been fighting in the Bakhmut region since May. Neither side can gain new territory, but they wear each other out badly. Ever since the Russian and Ukrainian troops began to concentrate their troops and resources on the small city, Bakhmut became of paramount importance as a battlefield. So far, Russian forces have not been able to advance beyond the city's outskirts and disrupt crucial ground lines in the city that were used to supply Ukrainian forces. This helped the Ukrainian forces to strengthen their defense. The failures of the Russian forces have increased so much that they no longer think they can take Bakhmut. As a result, Russian soldiers in eastern Ukraine have no morale or motivation to attack. As usual, the Kremlin government chooses to lie to boost the morale of the frontline soldiers. The Russian government announces imaginary attacks and victories through the media, especially in the Bakhmut region. The Kremlin government's lies are exposed by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The heavy economic, military, social, and political effects of the war between Russia and Ukraine are changing the entire world order. Another effect of the war was that its geopolitical effects triggered military and political measures. Military measures and balances of power around the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, the NATO Eastern Bloc, and the Baltic Sea have suddenly changed. The biggest external impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine was arguably seen in the Baltic Sea and its surrounding countries. When Russian armies entered Ukraine, Putin actually expected a positive change for himself. He had the intention of occupying Kiev within days and making the whole of Europe accept US hegemony. But the war did not go as Putin wanted, and the balances moved against Russia. Day by day, leading NATO forces have made a serious build-up on the Russian border in Eastern Europe. Afterwards, NATO took serious initiatives in the Baltic Sea, with Sweden and Finland making their official applications to NATO. Russia has actually been completely expelled or isolated from the Baltic Sea at this point. Vladimir Putin used Kaliningrad as a trump card and tried to put pressure on his neighboring NATO countries, especially for a period. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia faced Russian threats, one after the other. NATO, on the other hand, has prevented Russia's threatening moves with its recent breakthroughs. NATO exercises carried out in the Suwałki region, which is seen as the land crossing between Poland and Lithuania, increased the reliability of the region. These exercises, on the other hand, meant the complete closure of the link between Belarus and Kaliningrad. Afterwards, very critical negotiations were held between Estonia and Finland. As you can see on the map, Estonia's Tallinn and Finland's Helsinki port are located opposite each other in a strait in the Baltic Sea. The strait opens into the port of St. Petersburg, Russia's most important port in the Baltic and its only coast. A power that can be created in the strait can completely destroy Russia's moves in the Baltic Sea in Estonia these days. He started to take a step towards this. Estonia wants to close the Baltic Sea for Russia. As a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Estonia is considering the possibility of effectively blocking the passage of Russian ships through the Baltic Sea. Estonia's contiguous zone practice, which can be up to 12 nautical miles from its 12-mile territorial waters, allows the country to search military vessels and civilian vessels in the Gulf of Finland to monitor compliance with Estonian laws. Currently, the Gulf of Finland within this region is designed to leave a 3-mile wide corridor for free navigation, and Estonia will officially close this corridor by declaring it a contiguous zone. In fact, this means the naval blockade of St. Petersburg, one of the most powerful ports in the Russian Federation, and others in the Leningrad Oblast, and the blockade of the Baltic Sea of the Russian Federation. At the same time, the most important thing in this matter is not the possibility of announcement, but the possibility of fact-checking. On the Estonian side, it should be noted that the entire Estonian fleet consisted of 4 ships. The ML1 Bolil Indorman class mine layer and 3 Sandown class mine layers make up the Estonian fleet. Border Services also has 1 Kindle Kurvets multi-purpose rescue ship and boats. It should also be noted that Estonia purchased Blue Spear anti-ship missiles from Israel in 2021, which will become part of the coastal defense complex. This means that they create a serious land defense against passing ships. That is, in terms of naval capabilities, the country is unlikely to oppose the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Federation. However, this is not so important when it comes to the fact that the country is a NATO member, and any attack on a boat flying the country's flag would be an attack on the alliance itself. Even if the Russian Navy is far superior to the Estonian one, Russia also knows that it cannot oppose the NATO fleet. For this reason, they are trying to act more moderately instead of taking a hard stance against Estonia's move allegations. In recent days, we can see that the Russian Navy has been acting much more moderately in the region. Hard moves often come from NATO member Baltic states. One of these drastic moves was NATO's dismissal of ambassadors as diplomatic relations between the Baltic states and Russia fell. NATO and EU members Estonia and Latvia have told their Russian ambassadors to leave the country after Moscow said it had downgraded diplomatic relations with Estonia, accusing it of being completely anti-Russian. Estonia, Latvia, and their Baltic neighbors Lithuania are among a group of NATO allies who strongly advocate Germany providing Leopard battle tanks to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian invasion. Russia's foreign ministry said it told the Estonian envoy that they should leave next month and that both countries will be represented in each other's capitals by a temporary chargé d'affaires rather than an ambassador. Foreign Minister Urmas Reinsalu said that Estonia responded in the same way by telling the Russian envoy to leave the country by February 7. Reinsalu said in a statement, "We will continue to support Ukraine as Russia plans large-scale attacks, and we call on other like-minded countries to increase their assistance to Ukraine." Lithuania dismissed the Russian ambassador and demoted its diplomatic representation in April after Ukraine accused Russian forces of killing civilians in the town of Bucha. Moscow said Monday's move was in response to Estonia's decision to reduce the size of its Russian embassy in Tallinn. This political showdown reveals the degree of tension in the region. Estonia explains its closure of the corridor for different reasons. The concept covers not only the military defense aspect, but also international activities in the direction of economic security, stability in the provision of vital services, internal security, and defense partnership. According to Estonian Prime Minister Kai Kallas, the concept was updated due to the deteriorating international situation in the West. In general, Estonia's main task in the concept is to prevent aggression against the country. An attack by Russia should be impossible. So defense spending has been increased to 2.8% GDP and will exceed €1 billion, according to Interior Minister Lauri Läänemets. The concept emphasizes the protection of the civilian population in the face of military attack. In addition, the activity of the Russian special services is a constant source of danger to the population. In fact, this is true for all other Baltic countries, because we know that Russia has established elbow contact with NATO countries in all its exercises in the Baltic Sea. But in the Baltic Sea, arguably NATO needs a much stronger strategy. With Sweden and Finland soon joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the alliance must act quickly to develop plans that acknowledge the new geopolitical reality in the Baltic Sea region. Once Sweden and Finland become members, the alliance will need a comprehensive security approach that addresses the region as a whole, rather than dividing it into traditional Baltic and Scandinavian camps. Since Peter the Great, Russia has had imperial plans for the region, and this is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future. Russia's tactical defeats in eastern Ukraine should not create strategic complacency among NATO policymakers to strengthen Baltic Sea security. They should see Sweden and Finland's entry into NATO as the starting point, not the finish line. If NATO takes the right steps, the participation of Sweden and Finland will allow the alliance to more easily defend the Baltic states and more effectively deter Russian aggression in the region. Update and modernize NATO's contingency plans in the Baltic Sea region. It should establish a NATO combat group in Finland and draft a strong contingency plan for possible Russian attacks. It does not seem very likely that the war will shift to this region. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.